Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Bava Daf Kuf Tes. We are going to begin on Kuf Chesamid Beis by the new Mishnah toward the bottom. So the Masnisin says as follows: Heichen Pigdoini. Pretty legitimate question. Person asks, "Where is my pikadon? You're supposed to be watching it." So Omerlo Avad. So he was tying Tanas Avad. He claims that it was lost. Mashbiachani, so swear to me, and we have witnesses there afterwards that he consumed it. So Mishalom Karen. So in this he pays Karen. Says Rashi, De'ein chaimish v'asham el im chayda. Now he did not admit to this. This is all very important, which probably could have helped us a lot in Perek Meruba, this Mishnah. That the only time, well, first of all, Tain Tanas Oven, there's no din kefel, period. But when do you pay Karen? You pay Karen only when you have witnesses, but you didn't admit to it. However, if let's say you admit yourself without the witnesses, then you have to not just pay back the Karen, but also you have to pay also the Chaimish and Asham. So it makes sense. An asham is because at least this person is now in. He made a mistake and he admitted to his mistake. He was haida, so therefore he can bring an asham. This other person, l'chayra, through edim, so he's not chayv chaimish, because the pasuk, as Rashi says begezel hager b'parshas naso visvada. It's only when you confess, then there's a chiyuv of chaimish and asham. So you turn to this ganav, in which it's possible you will have to pay kefil. So when witnesses come, you have to be kefil. However, in this case, if you're haida, you actually pay less. Why? Because the money can ask potter, as we've said many times. So, in short, very important Mishnah. By Tain Tanas Avad, you never pay kefil. Tain Tanas Ganav, you pay kefil. But there's a distinction. If Edim come afterwards by Tain Tanas Avad, you pay Karen. However, when it comes to Tanas Ganav, you pay kefil. When you're haida by Tain Tanas Avad, in that situation, you pay also the chaimish and bring carbon asham. If you're hiding by yourself by Tantanas Gana, because it's kanas, you don't pay kefil anymore, so all you do is pay Karen. Karen Chaimish and Asham, of course. Hagoizlos Aviv, a person, not the greatest son in the world, steals from his dad. Vinish below, and he makes a shvua. Umes, and then the father dies. So maybe the son could have been Yarish at some point. So Harizem is Shalom Karen V'chaimish V'asham, Muvana V'ol Echav. So because even though his father's not in the picture anymore, he still has to pay back the Karen, Chaimish, and Asham to his brothers, or to the children. It says Rashi, V'yafal gav the nafal Yerusha kamei, even though the Yerusha came to them, the heich boil mevid hashava, the ein ma'akiv afil keneged chelkai. So we say it doesn't make any difference. Even though we're dealing with the din Yerusha over here, he still has a chiyuv of hashava. He still has an obligation to return that which he stole from his father, basically. And even though because he was tantanas ganav, so and he was haidim atzmai, so in that situation he would pay back the keren chaimish and asham. Okay, v'im ein raitza. Let's say he doesn't want to do it. Like who would want to do it? Oh, she'ein lo loiva. There's no borrower. Ubali chayiv boy. Oh, she'ein lo. He doesn't have loiva. Ubali chayiv boy Ephraim. So you should borrow, and the bali chayiv will come and collect. So Rashi says loiva macher. Umeishav echel v'kaimitz asashava. So he'll be able to give to his brothers, and then the bali chayiv, the people he borrowed from, will be able to collect. Rashi says min, and we'll use the Mesuras Hashas, min ha-Yerusha, as chelko. They'll be able to collect that which is owed to them by his chelik. Im hayu shnayim achim, let's say it was two brothers, who shlishi, he was the third, Nifroim Bali Chayvin Min Shlish Yerusha Veshar Yigvu Mimanu. Okay, so that's an option. So if the guy doesn't have any of his own money, so then he can just borrow money, and then the mal will collect. Harmliv Noi. Person says to his son, Kainim iyata nehenim shali. I'm making a net, you can't get enough from me. Now imes, you're a shana. If or when the father dies, so the son will still be able to inherit from him. Kuf Tesamanal. Why? Because it's mashma when he said this, and we've seen this also this Mishnah pretty often. He only meant it in his lifetime. B'chayv Moisai. He says, I don't want you to get benefit from me while I'm alive or even after I die. So imes lo yershena. So obviously he won't be able to yarish him either. However, Yachsel Levana v'lo echav. It will go to his relatives. V'im ein lo, if let's say he doesn't have, lo yivu b'alichai b'ayim v'nefrayim. Okay, so that's it. He won't be yarish. V'yachsel Levana v'lo echav, and it'll go to them. Says Rashi, v'im ein lo ma yoichel. If let's say he has no food, right? This guy has nothing to eat, so life he can borrow but oichel and eat. Which is obviously a big chiddush. Okay. Let's see the Gemara. Rav Yosef, afil arniki shel tzedakah. Now, what does that mean? Says Rashi, im enu moitze yarish aviv. So if he stole from his father, and he can't find a yarish from his father to return it, so he can give it to tzedakah, but fine. So that's what he should do. So Amar Papa, actually let's see this Rashi entirely. You can't find a yarish to his father, so who should he give this money to? Right? He owes money because he stole from his father. So yitin oisel arniki shel tzedakah v'lo yakvenu biyadai. There's no other yarish except for you. You're the only yarish. So in that case, give it to the arniki shel tzedakah. Zomar papa v'sar shiyomer, and you need to say zeg gezel avi. You have to basically say, okay, guys, this is money that I stole from my dad. So my nimchel nafshe. Why can't he just be moichel himself? Didn't we learn machal al karen v'loy moichel al chaimish, that there's the possibility of being moichel on the karen and not on the chaimish, and in that situation, you wouldn't have to go after them. So Alma bar mechilhu, we see that a nigzel has the capacity to be able to be moichel. So if there's no other yarish except for him, so basically it's all his anyway. So he's basically the Goslin and the Nigzel. So since he's the Nigzel in a certain respect, because he's the Yarish, he should just be able to keep it for himself by being Michael. The pasuk says, "V'im ein ish goyel l'hashav asham." What happens if a person does not have any relatives to give back the asham? When it says asham, it's not referring to the carbon. Rashi says it's a karen shel gzela. This is the actual principle of the gzela. This is the karen. So, in fact, you got to have a relative somewhere, right? A third cousin once removed, right? But the fact that you're a yid, you must have some relative. We're talking about, let's say you stole from a ger. Now that ger must have does not necessarily have a yarish. Says Rashi, you stole from a ger, v'nishbol a sheker, and you lied. And so in that situation, Hari Shigozla Ger V'nishboloi, let's say you stole from a ger and then you swore Taintanas Ganav Vishama Shemes Hager. Turns out the ger died. So he's not your relative, and you have to return it to the Nigzel, but he has no one to give it to. And you're basically going to Yerushalayim, to the Kohan. It says you should go to the Kohanim, as the pasuk says, Hashem Hamusha v'Hashem L'Kayin. So we're going to see later on, again, Hashem is referring to the Karen, Upagab Oisa Ger, and you end up encountering this ger, which something unbelievable happens. he actually did not die. Right? You thought he did, but he didn't actually die. So instead of paying the Geneva, you can borrow it and basically pay him later. Says Rashi, Ger b'milva, nafakun mataras gazela. So now you're going to basically borrow the money from the ger, and now it's no longer mataras gazela. It says Rashi, lachi ma'is ger. So when the ger dies, havli hayim muchsuk v'zachem in a hefker. So again, if there's a din gazela, so you have to return it. However, if he died. However, let's say he didn't die, and you were going there, and all of a sudden you encounter him, and instead of saying, paying me the Geneva, you can just borrow it and pay me later. So now that he dies, Zachal Rabbi Yosef Glili. Rabbi Yosef Glili says in that case, you're now considered to be okay. You're considered to be okay. You can keep the money. You got to get rid of that money. It's not your money. You got to give it. So if he died, you have to give it to someone. So therefore, that's who should give it to, the Arnaki Shel Sadaka. Fine. So that's the answer is, again, it's a machlokas Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Kiva, whether or not you can just keep it in that case, because we're talking about there's a Gezel Hager. He has no Yorshim. He dies, but before he did that, he let you borrow the money that you stole. Pretty nice guy. Rabbi Yosef Glili says that you can get around doing this by not having to pay him back. It doesn't matter yourself or others, you can be moichel. So it says Rashi, Kegoin hacha, the mochel high gavra gezel hager lenashe. He was the ganev who stole from the ger is being forgiven. But the ganev who stole from the ger can basically forgive himself. So this is more like our Mishnah, according to the sheet of Rabbi Kiva, that you're not able to be moichel, which is the reason why our Mishnah says that you have to give it to someone. You can't just keep it. Now, Rav Yosi, who says that you could just simply do this, that's what Rashi says over here. Rabbi Kiva lo shno masnisin the katani misham keren v'chaimish levanav le'echav is Rabbi Kiva. Right, so our Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Yosi, who did the feel zakva b'milva, l'chayra, this whole trick doesn't seem to be necessary. If you can be moichel yourself anyway, so then you shouldn't have to be zakva b'milva. You shouldn't necessarily have to ask the ger, I know I stole from you, but instead, can I just borrow this money? Then afterwards, when you die, you don't say this part, but afterwards, when he dies, all of a sudden you can keep that money because you're zaycha. But the truth is, even if it was still gazel, you should be able to be moichel yourself. So why does it mention the case of zakva b'milva? V'hadid tani zakva b'milva hadicha kaychad Rabbi Kiva. Diafil zakva b'milva eino takana ad shiyaitzig zel matachas yadai. It's just coming to tell you the chiddush that Rabbi Kiva is so strict that even if the ger says, you know what, it's not gazel anymore, it's just a loan, still you have to you can't hold on to it. But according to Rabbi Yosef Glili Taki, who would actually hold it doesn't make any difference, even though it was not, as Rashi says, if it actually never was removed from the law of gzeil from your father's hands, or the ger, you can just be moichel. Okay. And the Gemara says over here, will come in Parach, which will end up being question 14, im kain gezel ger the nafak kohanim heichem shkachasla. Okay, we'll see what that is in a second. Mask Rav Sheshes. Yihach Rabbi Yosef Glili lashmi'inon lenafshe. Why does he mention the case about being moichel yourself? A kol shekain lacher. Rabbi Kiva lashmi'in lacherim. Fine, that's that. Rabbi Yosef Glili's chiddush is that you could even be moichel yourself, and certainly others can be moichel you. Rabbi Kiva l'shaminan lacherim, that even when it comes to others, to lo matzi machal, they cannot be moichel. The kol shekain lanashi lo matzi machal. Is that basically what it's trying to tell you? Ella, it's kind of hard to understand, especially that we already learned in a previous Gemara that a person who's a nixel could be moichel. So how do we understand this? El Omer of Sheshus, Hav Rav Yosef Glili. And therefore we're going to try to actually fit our Mishnah into the sheet of Rabbi Yosef Higlili. Says Rashi, why did we mention this case that you actually have the ger say a moichel alone, which he's allowed to do because it's a cherem, and now you just borrow the money? Says Rashi, Givanda afki ger gufe dehavi nigzel mataris gazelo. So now the nigzel himself says it's not gazel anymore. Dehavi kamoichel acherem havi mechila. So that certainly is a form of mechila. Skipping 2 lines into Rashi, but say Nami Rabbi Yossi, the mighty Rabbi Yossi lenashe the lo matzimachal. Well, you yourself you can't. Givandol afig nigzel mataris gazela. So says back in the Gemara. So kikam Rabbi Yossi guli the matzimachal lacherem. Maybe the only time you can be moichel is dafka others. In other words, the ger can be moichel you, the nigzel can be moichel you, the gazlan. Avol anafshe lo matzimachal, and therefore really Rabbi Yossi could be like our Mishnah, because the father died, so the father wasn't moichel, so you can't be moichel yourself. So that's how you can possibly understand it. So they're both teaching, as we said before, the problem was they were teaching the lesser chiddush. Rabbi Yossi should have been the case about yourself, that you could be moichel. Rabbi Akiva should say it doesn't work even lacherem, and our Mishnah is only lenafshe, which seems dafka. So we're saying that Rabbi Yosef we could distinguish and make a qualify that maybe the only time Rabbi Yosef says you can be there's a din of mechila is only by the nigzel being moichel you, but not you yourself. You can't be moichel yourself. Therefore, Rabbi Yosef can fit into our Mishnah. The only reason why it worked is because zakam b'milva, and therefore it's only in that situation, because now that the ger died. So how could you be moichel yourself? It's not gazela because it's now alone, which is mashma. If it wasn't alone, if it still remained gazela in your hands, then you would have a chiyuv to do it somehow, to be able to have to give it away. Let's say to Arnaki Shil Sadaka. Rabbi Omer Hava Rabbi Akiva. Actually, it could be only like Rabbi Akiva, and basically we're going to say the same thing. Kiyam Rabbi Akiva Deloy Matzi Machal Anashe. Again, you can't. Rabbi Akiva, who says you can't be moichel, that's only according to himself. You, the gazlan, cannot be moichel yourself. You have to give it back. However, for others, you could be moichel. So again, we're basically saying the same answer, but we're saying maybe the distinction is not within Rabbi Yosef Glili, but it's in Rabbi Akiva. Says Rashi, the last line: the Afagav de Ger Zakfu Kivandoi Mochel Mechil Gemura. So it wasn't a complete mechila, well, nakli materis gzela. So it's interesting, because the question is, what do you mean? If, according to Rabbi Akiva, he says that others can be moichel, so how come this case of gezel hager, where zakum of b'milva, is no longer gazela? So then why would Rabbi Akiva say that there's no takan until you get the gazela mitachas shado? It's not gazela anymore, right? Why does he use that word gazela? Because the truth is, you just have the ger was a nice guy, right? He said zakum b'milva. Why did he do that? Because he could have just been moichel straight out and say, don't give it to me at all. Why did he say zakum b'milva? It's because he wasn't really completely moichel. He wants his money back. But he said, you know what? I'll give you a week or a month to pay me back. So therefore, that's not considered to be a real mechila of the gezel of the ger. And therefore, for that reason, that's why Rabbi Akiva makes that distinction in that particular case. Okay, Mechlal, so we continue to Kuf Testament Bays. From here, we can deduce and infer. Rav Yossi HaGalili Sabar, maybe if that's what Rabbi Akiva says, that there's a distinction between you and the other person, maybe that must be who Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, who's more lenient, holds that you could be moichel yourself. As el gezel, so el gezel de hager. So if it's true that, according, and this is what we saw in Rashi, that in reality, according to Rav Yosef Glili, you could even be moichel yourself. So then, in the case of gezel ger, you stole from a ger, that it says there's an inyan of giving it to the kohen. Why do you have to give it to the kohen? You can just be moichel, right? So Amurabba Hakmai Skinan Kishigozel as a ger, you stole from the ger. Benishbelo, and you swore against it. Umesa ger, v'hoidel acher misa, but your admission was after he died. In the Doidi, at the time that he died, Kanu Hashem. It was actually Hashem who's Kaina, but Nasl Kohanim. And therefore, in that case, you have to give to the Kohanim. Question 14. Which again is Rabbi Yosef Glil, as we just saw. So then, why would you ever give it to the Kohen? So again, this is what he says, that you only admitted after the ger died. So look in Rashi. Kanu Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kedeksiv HaMushav Hashem HaKoyin. Kanu Hashem V'Naslu Kohanim. Okay, fine. So that's it. That's the answer. Okay, weiter. Boy Ravina, Gezel Hagiyaris Mahu. So let's say, so we talk about you stole from a ger. So we had this whole question. Again, he dies. What exactly is the din? Who's zakval b'milva? Can you be malcha yourself? How about when it comes to a giyaris? So what's and again, as Rashi explains, shegazel osa v'nishba v'hoydel achar misa. So it's the same case. You're hoydel achar misa. So the question is, do you also give it to the kohen in that case? Do we say you should give it to the kohen, or do we say not? So mahu isha rachmanavo isha. Maybe this whole din of if there it says im einul ish goyel, so you can give it to a kohen is davkan ish, but not to a woman. Well, dilma orchidikrahu. It's just that's the language of the pasuk, but there's no difference between a man or a woman. So Amalei Rabbi Aharon Ravina Tashma. Come in here, proof. Tasanyas, we learn the brisa ish einli el ish manayim kishu aimer hamusha. When it says return, so when it says that language harikan shnayim, it's referring to both. So trei hashavos ksiv. There's two. Well, hashiv hamushav lishnachrina trei hashamos ksiv. Okay, says Rashi. So anyway, the point is clearly that there's no distinction between a man and a woman when it comes to this din of giving to the kohen. So why does it say the word ish? So ish atasar chalachsa charav im yesh lo goalim. When it comes to a man, you have to go and search and figure out. Maybe he has some children. Before he give it to the kohen. Im lav katan yatatzar chalachsa charav. However, you stole from a ger who's a kid. You don't have to go after his kids because you do shein lo goalim because you know he doesn't have kids. He's too young to have had a child. Therefore, ish is not coming to exclude a woman; it's coming to exclude a katan. Tanuban Hashem l'kayin. So kanu Hashem v'nas l'kayin sheba oisoi mishmar. So the din is again, if you stole from a ger, so you have to give which kayin. So you have to give from that mishmar. As we know that there's 24 mishmaros which are divided weekly that the kohanim serve in the Beis HaMikdash. So whatever week that you're about to achieve that kapara, you give it to that mishmar. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Why can't you just give to whichever coin you want? So milvad el hakipurim ashir chaper boilav. Now this pasuk, says Rashi, is mashmil misha zen nitan la nitan the el hakipurim in yochel hakav el koin shav oisa mishmar. When it comes to the ram, it's necessary that you have to give it to the person who is serving in the Beis HaMikdash. So that's a requirement. Fine. So yechaper bo'olav hari l'kayin shebayis mishmar kasam adaber. Fine. So therefore, that drasha is telling you they have to give it to a member of that mishmar. Okay. All right, let's hold off by the Tanur Rabbanan for a second. Let's look at question TA7. So the question asks like this: Gezel ger v'nishba v'hoyde v'zakvul of a milva. Again, he was a nice guy. Umesa ger. Rav Yosef Omer zacha b'masha b'yadai. Mechila. So madua loyam rinan b'chol gezel ger diyifted havika mechila. Why don't we just push it say that every time a ger dies, that you can just simply be meichel? So one answer is, let's just say it says, O mishum de zakma b'milva shani de havli k'meichel acherim. So perhaps the fact that his zakman b'milva it's different because it's Michael Lacherim. So because the ger did it, so therefore, what's the question? Why don't we say by every gezel ger you're putter like machila? No, it's not the same thing because he was zachav b'milva. So he removed it mitaris. He removed it mitaris gzela, and therefore that's the reason. Or because over here we're talking about hoide kaidim shemes that he admitted before he died. The gezel ger b'hoide achar shemes dekanu Hashem. So that's the second answer. That the only time is dafka in a situation they were hoide before he died. But if you're hoide afterwards, then all of a sudden the pasuk, as we saw before, well, just saw in Amud Beis, would kick in. Okay, so that's TA7, which actually is the two answers. I actually got one of them correct by being Zafla B'milva. Let's find this. Zafla B'milva. Okay, so this will be TA7. So again, it's considered like use Michael. It's Michael Acherim. Alternatively, this is really the same thing as question 14. TA7, that if it was after Misa, so then it has to be given over to the Kohen. Okay. Question 8, TB8. Beautiful. Very clean answer. That's TB8. Let's write that down. Okay. Good. All right. So let's continue by the Tanrabanan now. Tanrabanan. Hari Shahaya Geisel Kayin. Let's say a person stole. Menayin Shal Yomer can't say Hoyel v'Yatzel Kohanim, since I have to give it to the Kohanim anyway. Varihu Tachas Yadi Yehe Shali. This Kohen can't make this Kal V'chaimer. He must give it away. He can't say, well, I'm a Kohen, and so what happens? The Kohen stole from a ger. So the din is, I was hoida after he died, and therefore the din is I have to give it to a Kohen. I happen to be in the Mishmar, so I'm just going to keep it for myself. The din who? Im b'shel acherim, when it comes to Yisrael, of others who zoicha b'shel atzmo l'kol shekain. Again, you would think that it would make sense if Yisrael is in this situation, he would just give it to a Kohen and that's it. So I'm a Kohen, so I should be able to keep it. No, you can't make such a claim. Rather, it's necessary you actually have to give it to someone else. Rav Nasan, another Kohen. Rav Nasan Aimer b'lashon acher, different language. Mad davar shein lo chelik boi. Something which I have no connection to. I'm just working in the base of Mikdash. Achi chades b'rshusai. Kishi chades b'rshusai. Ini yochel haitziu miyadai. Davar sheish lo chelik bo. I'm a Kohen, so I do have a chelik in this. Achi chades b'rshusai. So mishenechnas rshusai in a din shein acher yochel haitziu miyadai. So again, this Kohen can't make this kavachimer. He must give it away anyway. He can say, well, listen, it seems I have more of a claim to it because I'm a Kohen, so certainly I should be able to keep it. Well, no, you can't make that claim. Why? So let's slow down. Let's go to Rashi. Kohen shehis nadev carbon. You're a Kohen who made a nadav to bring a carbon. Kohen bo makriv karbonoisav b'chol shash yirtzeh. He can bring this carbon because it's in the dava, and he's a Kohen. He can do whatever he wants. He gets to keep the meat. He gets to keep the hide. As the pasuk says, "V'ish es kadosh you." So we find nimsa she'en l'vnei mishmar chelik boy. So the people in his mishmar have no chelik in it. So he has the ability to bring a carbon, and he gets to keep all the stuff. So mishenichnas l'shuso enu ach in ach yachol. If he did give it to a Kohen from that Mishmar, can't take it out of his hands. So that's when it comes to like karbonos. This is how you read it. So again, let's see this Kal V'chaimer. Which is this carbon that I bring as the Nadava. Once it's brought into my So they have no rishus over it, and I get to keep it. However, if I do give it to him, I won't be able to take it from him. So when it comes to something which I do have a chelik in it, again, because I'm in this mishmor, and Yisrael comes regarding Gezel Ger, so the din is that he's going to give this to me or to someone else, so then certainly no one should be able to take it from my hands. So Eno din shin acher yachol haitzim yadai. So the reality is, okay, so no one gave it to me, it's already in my hands, but I should be able to keep it low. When it comes to, again, the case of the kohen who makes a nedava for a carbon, no one has any rights to it, so to speak, but eventually the meat and the hides are given over to the kohanim. When it comes to the stealing of a ger, all the kohanim have rights to it too. So to you. So, right? So therefore you can't make that statement, because it's not that you have rights to it and they don't. They also have rights to it. So therefore you can't just keep it for yourself, you have to give it away. Ella gazel yasmatachas yadai, you have to take the gazel out of your hands, umischalek hakohanim, and give it to your brothers, the other people that work with you in that shomer. You understand, but the pasuk L'chara says that you get to keep it. It says Rashi shekayin makrib karbonosav b'cholei shiyirtzeh, that he can be makar of the carbon whenever he wants. We said, and as we said before in the Rashi, this Rashi says he gets to keep the hides and the meat. So v'hachinami hay el asham karbonos to kayanhu b'zachibe kivan de makriv le v'zachibe gezel v'zachibe. So gezel nami didehu, it should be his. So understand, why would we say that he has to give it away? The pasuk seems to imply lo you. Now hachmai skin can be kohen tameh. That's referring to that we're dealing with a kohen tameh. Says Rashi, the in royal hakriv el ha'asham, where it's not fit for him to be able to bring the carbon because he's tameh. Well, 1 second. If that's what we're talking about, the kohen tameh, even kohen tameh davar sheish lo chelik bo mi islay, he has no chelik, he's tameh. What does that mean? A davar sheish lo chelik bo. We're not talking about a situation where he's tameh. We're talking about a situation where he's tahar, because otherwise, why would we say he's a chelik? Rather, we learn out l'koyin, we learn a gzer sheva from the din of a stei achuza. What's that? By ancestral field. The sign. The pasuk says achuzasai. Mata v'lo mem nayin l'sadeh hayotz l'kohanim b'yovel. How do we know that a stei achuza will go out to the kohanim on the yovel year? V'goala echad min hakohanim, and one of the kohanim will be goyelit. So, Menayin Shlo Yomer, why can't this Kohen, if this is the Kohen who has the Stei Achuza, why can't he say this? Let's say we're dealing with a Kohen who bought this field earlier before Yovel. Hayel v'yatzel Kohanim b'Yovel, since the Kohanim get a Stei Achuza after Yovel. V'arahi tachas yadi, and I happen to be a Kohen, I'm holding on to it. Teshali, let me keep this land myself, because it just has to be given to a Kohen after the Yovel. So if that's the case, I'm a Kohen, so I should be able to keep it. Which is basically the same svara, the same idea of Gezel Ger. It's the same idea that let me just keep it. So it says Rashi, Hayitzil Kohanim, Makdish Stei Achuza. If a person sanctifies an ancestral field, V'lo Go'ala Mina Hektish, you didn't redeem it, you had a chance to redeem it, but you didn't. Umachor Gizbor Lacherim, and the Gizbor, the treasurer of Hektish, sells this land. So at that point, because again, when it comes to Stei Achuza, if you're makta Stei Achuza, you can always redeem it back. We decide not to, and the Gizbor sells it, so that Loikeach understands that this land, because it was belonged to Hektish, it's going to go back to them after Yovel. And it goes to the Kohanim. So again, l'chayra, he should be able to hold on to it. If this Kohen is the one who bought it before the Yovel, if he's the one who bought it. If this was some other person that bought this Stei Achuza, that was someone's matis Stei Achuza, and then the Gizbor sold it to some other person on Yovel, the Kohanim get it. So I could have received someone else's. No, I actually bought this land. I should be able to keep it. Tam loimer kistei hacherim l'koyin tiyeh chuzasa yechuzasa shalo. The yechuzas to him the ein zu shaloi. However, not this, because since he bought it. So the only time we say it goes is only when it's a steachuza. But in this situation, because it was your makdish steachuza, then you sold it to someone else, so then it goes back on yovel to the kohen. Okay, it said again, you don't get to keep it. Even though you're the kohen, you don't get to keep it. So too, when it comes to a kohen who stole gezel hager, even though the din is, if he was hoide after the gezel hager, you would normally say, oh, if that's the case, then l'chera, we should just simply say that he should just be able to hold on to it because it has to go to the kohanim anyway. The din is no, it just goes to the people in the mishmar. Okay, question TA8, no. TB9, no. Rabbi Giver. Let's see. Let's see question 10 again. Shomer shenishba lifdoras atzmo. Shomer made a shvua to pot himself, and afterwards, tava hashomer esaganav. Then all of a sudden, the shomer, because he made a shvua, he ends up going to the ganav because they found out who the ganav is. Mahi hafrasha hafshara diyamarava lafi lishna kama. Be'inyan ihavi hoidas aganav hoida is the admitting of the ganav hoida to pater from kefil. So since there was already being moida without, because there was no edim, so if you're moida you don't pay for kefil, as we saw in this Mishnah also in the stuff. So we know that moida kanas pater. So therefore, if you're hoida, you only pay keren chaimish v'asham. But the Gemara is taking for granted that he can't be moida to a person on the street to pater himself. So is this shomer at all in the din that being moided to him made him pater or not? Okay. Question 11 and 12. Tanad b'mishnah b'geizels avim nishbol you mace. So you stole from your father, and then the father subsequently dies. You have to give your brothers. So lama ein hu atzmo yachol limchol la'atzmo eschelko. Why can't he do it? Didn't we learn before the yesh the nignav or the nigzol can be moichel? So I wrote Mandi Omer. So it's Rabbi Yossi Guli and Rabbi Kiva. Mandi Omer holds that you could be moichel yourself and others. Others say you cannot be moichel, not you or not yourself. Really, both Mishnayos are like Rabbi Yossi Galili, and the only time it is good mechila is by others, but himself could be moichel, but probably not himself, and he cannot be moichel by himself, or by zakav b'milva. The ger was moichel somewhat, and is like another being moichel, so therefore he can keep it. And then I wrote, but the Zaykif Milva, since he wasn't totally moichel, you're still a gazlan, therefore you must return it. You have to return it. Okay, so I just wrote a whole bunch of stuff. What is the ish? It's not coming to exclude a woman. No, the same din applies to a woman, but only search a man or a woman. I wrote man or a woman. I would just write man. If you have a child, to return it. But a katan is poshit, has no children. 14. Be'eza beis in yanim amrinan dekayin shel hamishmor hataifes b'mamoin ein yochel hachzik b'mashem b'yada. He can't keep what's in his hands. El sarach chalko im kol kohane hamishmor. So the kohen himself is the gezel hager he stole, or by stay achuzah. Adkan.